people, I think, forget he got elected because, many ways, like George Bush got elected in 2000, he was going to do things differently. He was going to bring a breath of fresh air to Washington. He was going to bring the country together. He was a unifying force. And that was lost. I think now he realizes he has to recapture that, because that was the reason why a big part of the country elected him.
But everyone says that, and nobody does it. I remember, I'm going to be a uniter, not a divider, said your former boss. How'd that work out? Not well. And the reality is that Barack Obama has, will be one of the most divisive presidents, perhaps not of his own making. He has really been a very polarizing figure, largely because people have projected onto him things that may not square with reality, but nonetheless, he hasn't succeeded at uniting the country.
Yeah, my answer to that is there's multiple factors that are involved in why that's the case. Some of which you have control over, much of which you don't have control over. The media environment you're in, it feeds that. Much of how we have the geography of the country feeds that, where people live, how they associate. The districts that we draw and all that feeds that. There's a bunch of societal factors that feed that. But the president has control over how he uses the social power of the presidency, how he communicates, and whether or not he reaches across the aisle. I think when I faulted President Bush for not doing that as what many of us had hoped, having been a former Democrat, him having been the first Republican that I worked for, that my thing was that he was going to make changes in Washington and do that. And when I faulted him, I got criticized by many in the Republicans and people at the White House for saying that, well, it was the Democrats' fault. They never went along. He kept trying. And my response back to that, well, the only thing that we have control over is what we do. We can't control over what they do.
Right.
And so the president, I think the president can be faulted, though Republicans have obviously said no to a lot of different things, not to the benefit of the country, I think, on both sides of this equation. The president has control over what he does, so he can be faulted for part of that.
For at least part of what
and not
what
being,
did.
I think, disciplined enough. You have to be exceptionally disciplined enough and wake up every day saying it's the easiest thing to do is to sort of default into that polarization, because we have an environment that feeds that. The hard thing to do is to push up against it.
Let's pick one thing that happened in the interim between the election and now, and that is the decision to reapprove the tax cuts for the wealthy in exchange for an extension of unemployment benefits. Do you consider the president's decision to extend the Bush tax cuts for the rich to be a sign of weakness or strength?
Well, I think it was a sign of weakness at the time. He wouldn't have done that if he hadn't gotten a shellacking in November. I actually think that they should have not extended him for some certain level over that amount. I think he should have pushed back on that.
Stood his ground on
it. Yeah, I think the country is like, why are we giving tax cuts to some?
Well, that's an issue on which he seems to have the public on his side. Right, the polls suggest that they don't want to see rich people get taxed.
They're fine with tax cuts at a certain level, but once it hits a certain level, and so I think he realized that he had to cut a deal fairly quick. I also think that he thought that a major part of what was going on in the economy was a confidence problem. He had done all the policy things he could have done. There wasn't much more he could have done. He had to start rebuilding confidence and consistency. So I think that's what drove it, though I think part of it, I disagree with the policy decision to give tax cuts, continued tax cuts for the super wealthy.
Right.
I think he thought that he didn't have much choice and he had to get this done.
You perceive, as others seem to, that he had a good couple of months. He had got the unemployment benefits extended along with the tax cuts. He got Don't Ask, Don't Tell passed. He got the biggest food safety bill in a generation or two passed. START treaty. He's had a pretty good couple months.
He's had probably the best 2 months of his presidency.
Right.
And it also, as you can add to, is his changes at the White House. I think that the change of Bill Daley for Rahm Emanuel, if people don't understand how big of that is, that will much difference that will make.
This is not just trading one Chicago guy for another.
No, and the opportunity that he was able to utilize in the horrible tragedy that happened in Arizona and give that speech that he gave and then followed up with the speech, the State of the Union address, all those things he has done well, and it's moved him back to where people thought he was when he got elected to office.
So let's talk about the other side now. So you've got the Republicans in charge of the House. You've got the Republicans on the verge of a majority in the Senate. I say that because with all the retirements that are now coming, Jim Webb being the most recent in Virginia, it looks like the Republicans have a path to a majority. And they've got about 8 billion people running for president, apparently. Should Republicans be hopeful about the next 2 years and about 2012 specifically, or not?
I think they should be hopeful about the Senate races. I think they should be hopeful for many local offices. I think the jury's out on whether or not the presidential race is going to be, how hopeful it can be about that.
It is winnable, but it's not a certainty.
Well, it's not. If you looked at the race today, Barack Obama would win re-election today, if he was today, because you basically, a president's re-election is mainly contingent on where his job approval is.
Yep.
If it's above 50 or 51%, then he's going to win.
And he's above 50. He's on the right side of 50.
He's on the right side of 50 right now. If it's below, 47, 48, then it's very hard for him to win. It's in that middle ground that you sort of fight over in the candidacy. So it's a shot. You don't know where the economy is going to be. You don't know where Obama is going to be since he's risen and fallen. So you don't have fully idea. They should be hopeful about local offices and some Senate races, and mainly the Senate races because the Democrats have a lot more vulnerable seats up than Republicans in 2012. They will probably for sure keep something close to the majority in the House, mainly because redistricting is going to benefit them. They won't expand it. But
well, they won so many state legislatures in this last election, and so that'll help with redistricting going forward.
Yes, and so many of the new seats that are getting added in places that are more Republican than not. And so I don't think they'll expand the majority, but it will help them solidify the majority. But the 2012 presidential race is still a dice roll, I think, and you never know who the Republicans could nominate. They could nominate somebody that has no capacity to win.
Don't talk about her that way.
Well, there's two hers this day. There's two hers these days.
Admit it. Leaving aside party affiliation, wouldn't a Palin-Bachmann ticket be for the next 2 years the gift that keeps on giving?
Yeah, either order that would be.
As a journalist,
from a commentator,
greatest thing in the world.
Absolutely,
to watch.
It would be great.
Is the issue of how the economy is doing more important in terms of the outcome of 2012 than who the Republicans nominate?
Absolutely, by a factor of 5.
So if the economy is continuing to come back, if unemployment is continuing to inch down, that makes it possible for the president to get reelected. If the economy does not come back, if unemployment goes up, he's dead.
Yeah, and the middle ground is where you don't really. So if it's two alternatives. If it really continues to go well and things go well, then it doesn't matter who they nominate. If it deteriorates badly, then it doesn't again matter who they nominate. Really, who they nominate. It's that middle ground where, and we've had 2 elections. The 2008 wasn't one of these elections. It was basically a Democrat was going to win.
Right.
I know everybody talks about the great Obama campaign and all that kind of stuff, but the factors were in such a way. It was
Hillary would have won.
Hillary would have won. Joe Biden would have run if he. I don't know if John Edwards would have run if stuff that had come out before Election Day had come out, but.
That was a generic D versus R election.
2004 and 2000 were 2 elections that were in that middle ground, and you don't know, and you don't ever know. I mean, we're in January, February. We're in February of 2011. You don't know what it's going to be like in February 2012.